Welcome to Honeybee. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Real stories of love, lies, and betrayal, where every truth stings. Let's begin. The moment I realized my wife had used my credit card to pay for a European vacation, I knew she had crossed a line that would forever change our marriage. She had no idea that her secret attempt at financial deception had already been documented, and that it would come back to confront her. After 12 years of marriage, I had become skilled at managing Jessica's expectations and avoiding unnecessary conflict. Rather than arguing, I often gave in to her preferences and spending habits, choosing peace over battles that felt like they drained the energy we needed for more important parts of our relationship. Over time, Jessica grew used to having things her way, seeing my willingness to fund her desires as proof of love, rather than understanding that it was simply me avoiding conflict. This pattern slowly created an imbalance in our marriage that couldn't last. My work as a financial consultant had given us a comfortable life. Jessica had freedom to spend on clothes, travel, restaurants, and social outings without needing to contribute much financially. She worked part-time as a yoga instructor, something she genuinely enjoyed, but her earnings were modest compared to my consulting income and the passive revenue from the software patents I had developed years earlier. For a long time, this setup seemed ideal. She could focus on activities that made her happy while I concentrated on growing my business and inventing new technologies without negotiating every financial decision. But as my business matured, I began thinking more seriously about our long-term financial security, retirement, savings, and wealth preservation. That's when I noticed Jessica's discretionary spending had been growing much faster than our income. What once looked like reasonable spending had grown into a lifestyle that was eating through nearly everything we earned. The wake-up call came while I was preparing financial statements for a meeting with our accountant. I discovered that for 2 straight years, we had been spending almost as much as we made, leaving little room for savings, emergencies, or investments. Jessica's purchases for clothes, travel, and entertainment were becoming a threat to our financial future. When I brought this up and suggested creating a budget, Jessica reacted with immediate resistance. She seemed offended that I would even consider limiting her access to what she believed was unlimited money. To her, my concerns felt like rejection rather than practical planning for our future. She didn't seem to understand that a budget wasn't a punishment. It was a way to secure our long-term stability. Jessica's response was to pull away emotionally and physically. She used intimacy as leverage, becoming distant whenever I brought up saving money, cooking at home, or cutting back on purchases. Over time, I realized that Jessica had never learned to separate love from financial generosity. Any attempt to put limits on spending felt, to her, like proof that I didn't care about her happiness. What disturbed me most was her apparent belief that being married entitled her to unlimited access to the money I earned, whether or not aligned with our shared goals. She viewed my income as ours when it came to spending, but took no interest in the planning or discipline required to manage it. Everything came to a head when Jessica's friends invited her on a 2-week luxury trip through France, Italy, and Spain, staying at expensive hotels and dining at fine restaurants. When she told me she wanted to go, I calculated her share of the trip's cost and saw it would require dipping into savings or racking up credit card debt. I explained that while the trip sounded amazing, we couldn't afford that kind of expense right now if we were serious about our financial goals. I suggested we start saving so we could take a similar trip the following year, paid for in cash instead of debt.
Jessica's reaction was surprisingly calm. Instead of arguing or withdrawing, she simply nodded and said she understood, agreeing to decline the invitation. I felt relieved. For the first time, I thought we might finally be on the same page about finances. But I was wrong. Jessica never intended to skip the trip. Instead, she secretly used my credit card information to pay for it, apparently assuming I would find out once she was already gone, leaving me little choice but to accept it rather than cause a scene. I first noticed something was wrong when I started receiving automated notifications from my bank about charges I didn't recognize, airline tickets, hotel bookings, and travel expenses. At first, I thought it was fraud by strangers. But as I examined the transactions, it became clear the person using my credit card was my own wife. I didn't confront Jessica immediately. Instead, I began gathering evidence. My professional background had taught me to handle potential fraud systematically. I downloaded all my credit card statements and bank records, building a detailed timeline of her spending. What I found was deliberate and calculated. She had planned the trip, coordinated with her friends, and charged every expense to my card without my knowledge. Jessica's social media posts during the trip provided even more proof. She posted smiling photos at luxury hotels, fancy restaurants, and high-end boutiques, proudly tagging them with captions like, "Living my best life" and "Girls' trip goals." There was no sign of guilt or awareness that she was funding all of this with stolen money. I stayed silent. Every charge, every post, every detail became part of a documented record that could be used in court if necessary. As the charges piled up, I realized this was about far more than money. It was about trust, respect, and what our marriage had become. Jessica had decided her dream vacation was more important than honesty or financial security. She seemed sure that I would forgive her, as I always had, and let things go. But this time was different. During the 2 weeks she was away, I consulted attorneys and financial advisors. They confirmed that Jessica's actions legally counted as credit card fraud, even though we were married, and that the evidence I had was enough to press criminal charges. My advisors helped me secure all accounts, change passwords, and add verification steps to prevent future access. When Jessica finally returned, glowing and refreshed, she acted as if nothing had happened, likely expecting me to be upset but eventually forgive her after some emotional discussion. She had no idea how much had changed in those 2 weeks. Instead of arguing, I calmly placed printed copies of all her unauthorized charges on the dinner table, along with screenshots of her posts from Europe. I told her I hadn't denied funding her trip to control her. I had done it because we couldn't afford it without jeopardizing our financial future. But rather than respect that, she had chosen to steal from me. Jessica first tried to deny wrongdoing, saying she couldn't steal from her own husband and that using family cards for family expenses was normal. When I reminded her that unauthorized use of credit card information is fraud regardless of marriage, she became defensive and blamed me for forcing her hand by refusing to pay for the trip. Her attempts to justify theft by blaming me only made things clearer. She didn't see her actions as wrong. I told Jessica I had already consulted attorneys and could press charges, and that she could be arrested. Instead of showing remorse, she seemed shocked that I would even consider taking legal action against her, as if marriage meant immunity from consequences. But I had decided this would be the moment I drew the line. I froze all our joint accounts, locked down my finances, and gave Jessica a choice: take responsibility, attend marriage counseling focused on financial trust, and work to rebuild what she had broken, or face criminal charges and divorce. Jessica refused to accept responsibility, insisting that my actions were controlling rather than protective. When it became clear she had no intention of changing, I followed through, filing criminal charges and starting divorce proceedings. The evidence I had was undeniable. Her social media posts, our financial records, and the timeline of charges made it clear she had acted knowingly and without permission. During the divorce, Jessica tried to claim entitlement to assets I had earned before marriage. The money she had stolen was deducted from her settlement, forcing her to repay it indirectly. Even then, Jessica painted herself as a victim, insisting she had been justified in taking the money because I refused to give it voluntarily. This entire experience taught me the hard truth about the difference between love and enabling. My years of avoiding conflict had allowed Jessica's entitlement to grow unchecked, eventually leading to theft. By constantly choosing peace over accountability, I had trained her to believe there would be no real consequences. Ultimately, Jessica's theft forced me to end a marriage that had been broken for a long time. It freed me from continuing to support someone who disrespected me and viewed me only as a source of funding. Ironically, the trip she thought she had gotten away with was what created the evidence that held her accountable. Sometimes, the most destructive choices people make end up being the catalyst for necessary change. Jessica's betrayal showed me that some boundaries, once crossed, cannot be forgiven, and that protecting yourself is not cruelty, but self-respect.